human fights to free alien girl from a fallen skiff, unaware her rescue will rewrite his past. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jake Miller was used to the harshness of the world. A soldier, a fighter, a man who had seen his share of battles and losses. But nothing could prepare him for the day his life would change forever. On a barren, desolate world, Jake's routine patrol took an unexpected turn. A ship, no, a skiff, crashed nearby, its wreckage scattered across the rocky terrain like broken bones. As he approached cautiously, the sharp winds howled, biting at his exposed skin. He wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't part of the mission. But something in the wreckage caught his eye, something that made his heart race and his instincts flare. Beneath the shattered pieces of metal and glowing debris, there was a figure, motionless. A woman. No, not a woman, an alien. She was unlike anything Jake had ever seen before. Her skin shimmered in the dim light, a pale violet hue that contrasted sharply against the dull backdrop of the planet. Her eyes, though barely open, glinted with a strange intensity. Jake didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, instinctively reaching out to her. "Hold on, I've got you," he muttered under his breath, as his hands grasped the jagged edge of the skiff and pulled her out of the debris. She barely reacted, her body limp, but the small movement of her hand brushing against his caused a spark of electricity in him. The connection was almost immediate. As he carefully maneuvered her to a safe distance, he felt the weight of her life in his hands. He didn't know who she was, why she was here, or what had happened to her, but one thing was clear, she needed help. As he checked her injuries, Jake noticed the odd, faint markings on her skin, something that hinted at her high status. Was she a prisoner? A soldier? Or someone far more important? He couldn't know, but he wasn't about to leave her. As the winds howled around them, Jake felt a strange pull, like something was forcing him to protect her. He couldn't explain it. It wasn't just compassion. It was something deeper, something inside him that couldn't turn away. His mind raced, but his heart knew what to do. He had to get her out of here, away from whatever had brought her to this forsaken world. But as he struggled to lift her, something he hadn't anticipated occurred. The ground beneath them trembled, a low rumble that grew louder, and suddenly, the air was thick with tension. He wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was coming for them. Jake struggled to lift the alien girl, her body limp in his arms, her breath shallow but steady. He had to get her somewhere safe, but where? This planet was a desolate wasteland. The only shelter he had was the remains of the skiff, and that wasn't going to protect them for long. The winds howled louder, the temperature dropping rapidly as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the barren landscape. The ground trembled beneath his boots again, and Jake froze. He wasn't imagining it. Something was out there, closing in fast. His instinct screamed at him to move, to find shelter, but the girl in his arms weighed him down. He glanced around, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The wreckage was their only cover. Without a second thought, he pulled her inside the twisted remains of the skiff. The walls were still intact enough to provide some protection from the wind. Jake carefully lowered her onto a seat, checking her vitals once again. She was still unconscious, but the faint warmth of her skin under his touch gave him some hope. He quickly rummaged through his pack, pulling out a first aid kit and applying some basic bandages to the cuts on her arms. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? What was she doing here? And why had fate thrown them together like this? The sound of heavy footsteps outside the skiff snapped him out of his thoughts. His hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, but then he stopped. There was no time to fight, not with her injured and unable to defend herself. He crouched low, his breath quiet as he listened. The footsteps stopped. A soft voice, alien and strange, echoed through the stillness. "She's here." The word sent a chill down his spine. They knew. They were looking for her. Jake's grip tightened on his weapon. He couldn't let them have her. Not after everything he'd done to get her out of that wreck. He glanced at the girl again, her face still peaceful despite the chaos surrounding them. He couldn't help but wonder who she was. The air inside the skiff was growing colder by the second, and Jake knew they wouldn't last long without warmth. He needed to act quickly. The door to the skiff creaked as it opened just enough for a shadow to slip through. Jake's muscles tensed, ready to spring into action. But then, the figure that stepped into the doorway wasn't what he expected. A tall, imposing figure with dark eyes and a serious expression. He was wearing military gear, much like Jake's own. The man spoke in a language Jake didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. It was one of command. Jake didn't hesitate. He stood up slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He didn't want to escalate things further, not with the alien girl still unconscious. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, his voice steady but filled with suspicion. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped further into the wreckage, his eyes scanning the room before resting on the girl. "She's important," the man finally said, his voice quiet but firm. Jake's heart skipped a beat. "I know," he said, his voice hardening. "But I'm not letting anyone take her." The man didn't seem surprised by the defiance in Jake's voice. He simply nodded, as if he'd expected this. "You don't understand," the man said, his voice now softer. "She's not just anyone. She's the one who can change everything." Jake's brow furrowed in confusion. What was the man talking about? What did he mean by change everything? He didn't have time to think about it further. The ground shook again, more violently this time. The rumble sent a shockwave through the skiff, knocking Jake off balance for a split second. When he regained his footing, he turned to the man. "We need to move. Now." The man nodded, his expression serious. "Follow me." Jake didn't hesitate. He picked up the girl and followed the stranger out of the skiff. The situation was quickly escalating beyond his control, but one thing was clear, whoever this girl was, her presence was about to change his life forever. Jake followed the mysterious man through the wreckage of the fallen skiff, his grip tight on the unconscious alien girl in his arms. The man led the way through the shattered landscape, his steps purposeful, almost as if he knew exactly where he was going. Jake, still trying to process everything, couldn't shake the feeling that his world was spinning out of control. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal, and the cold began to seep into his bones, the temperature dropping quickly as the sun vanished completely from the horizon. His breath clouded in the air, and the chill was starting to make his movement slower, more labored. But he had no choice. He had to keep moving. The man had led him to a hidden passage, an underground tunnel that seemed to stretch far beneath the surface. The flickering light from his helmet illuminated the narrow walls of the tunnel, and the eerie silence pressed in on Jake. "What's going on here?" Jake asked, his voice low, more to himself than anyone else. The man didn't answer at first, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. After a moment, he glanced back over his shoulder. "The girl you saved is no ordinary alien," he said quietly. "She's not just someone you can walk away from." Jake frowned. "I didn't plan to just walk away. But you still haven't told me who you are or why I'm involved in this." The man stopped in his tracks and turned to face Jake. His expression was serious, his eyes dark. "I'm someone who knows what she is. Someone who understands the consequences of saving her." The weight of the words hung in the air between them. Jake was about to respond when the man motioned to the far end of the tunnel. "We need to get her inside. It's not safe out here." They reached the end of the tunnel, and a massive, secure-looking door slid open automatically as they approached. Jake was barely able to take in his surroundings before he was led into a dimly lit chamber. He carefully set the girl down on a bed-like surface, glancing around at the advanced technology in the room. Screens flickered to life, displaying various symbols and alien writing he couldn't understand. The air smelled sterile, almost clinical. "You're safe here, for now," the man said as he moved to a console, typing in a series of commands. Jake sat by the girl's side, watching her intently. Her breathing had steadied, but she still hadn't woken up. "What exactly are you saying? Why would rescuing her matter so much?" Jake asked, frustration creeping into his voice. The man glanced at him, his expression hardening. "She's not just an alien. She's part of something much bigger. A key to something that can change the fate of your entire planet. You've just saved a piece of the puzzle that no one was supposed to find." Jake's heart raced at the implications of the man's words. He wasn't sure what to think. What was this girl really? Why was she so important? And how did it all tie into him, a soldier just trying to survive? The man turned back to him, his face serious. "What you don't know is that saving her will rewrite everything. Your past, your future, it's all connected now. You've already crossed a line, whether you understand it or not." Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had no idea what he'd gotten himself into, but it was clear that his life would never be the same again. Jake sat in the sterile, dimly lit room, his eyes fixed on the girl lying unconscious in front of him. He couldn't stop the question swirling in his mind. What was she? Why was she so important? The man who had led him here had been cryptic, offering only half explanations and vague hints about the girl's significance. He couldn't shake the feeling that his entire life had just been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The hum of the machines around him seemed to grow louder, almost as if they were responding to his growing unease. The girl's breathing was steady, but she was still out cold, her face peaceful in a way that didn't match the chaos around them. Jake glanced at the man again, who was now standing by one of the monitors, staring at the readings on the screen with a look of deep concentration. "How long will she be out?" Jake asked, his voice rough with the frustration he couldn't quite hide. The man didn't look away from the screen, but his voice was calm. "It depends. Her species doesn't heal like yours. The process takes time." Jake frowned. "So, what now? We just wait." The man turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Waiting is the easy part. The hard part is understanding what comes next." Jake stood up, his patience running thin. "I don't have time for cryptic answers. I need to know why this girl is so important. You said saving her would change everything. What does that even mean?" The man's eyes hardened, and he stepped closer, his voice lowering. "It means that you've just made a choice that no one was supposed to make. You've triggered something that has been dormant for centuries. And now, you're part of something far bigger than you could have ever imagined." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He wanted to argue, to ask more questions, but the weight of the man's words stopped him. The girl shifted slightly, and Jake's attention snapped back to her. His eyes traced the lines of her alien features. Her skin, pale and shimmering, almost seemed to glow in the low light. Her hair was silvery, cascading around her face in soft waves. She looked fragile, but there was something undeniably powerful about her presence. The man stepped back, giving Jake space, but his voice was firm. "You saved her for a reason, whether you realize it or not. You're now part of a chain of events that started long before you were born." Jake shook his head, trying to make sense of the situation. "What do you mean?" The man glanced at him briefly, his expression softening slightly. "The girl you saved is no ordinary alien. She's not just a random individual. She's the last of her kind, a key to an ancient power that has been hidden away for generations. And now, she's connected to you." Jake's mind raced. Last of her kind? Ancient power? None of this made sense. But something deep inside him told him that the man was telling the truth. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't deny the growing sense that his destiny had just been forever changed. The girl's eyes fluttered open, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. Her gaze locked onto his, intense and knowing, as if she understood everything he had been told and more. Her voice, soft and melodic, broke the silence. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. "Yeah, I did. But I don't know why." The girl smiled weakly, her expression serene despite the confusion in the air. "You will," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. "You will." Jake stood in the dimly lit room, his mind racing after the girl's cryptic words. "You will," she had said, but what did that even mean? His fingers ran over the edges of the metal table in front of him, his thoughts swirling. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours. He had started his day like any other soldier, only to find himself in the middle of something that felt like a storm he could neither control nor understand. The girl, this alien girl, was the center of it all. He couldn't shake the feeling that her presence here, in his life, was no accident. The man who had brought them here, the one who claimed to know what she was still standing by the monitors, silent now, as if waiting for something. Jake finally broke the silence. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice firm but tinged with frustration. The man turned to face him, his expression serious, as if he had been expecting this question. "Now, we wait for her to recover fully. But more importantly, we prepare for what's coming." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What's coming? What the hell are you talking about?" The man took a slow step toward him, his movements deliberate. "There are others who will come for her. And they won't stop until they have what they want." Jake's chest tightened. He knew this wasn't just about a rescue anymore. There was something bigger at play, and he was caught in the middle of it. "I'm not leaving her," Jake said, his voice resolute. "I didn't save her just to let her fall into the hands of whoever is coming." The man nodded, but his expression remained neutral. "I know. That's why you're here. But this isn't just about saving her anymore. It's about protecting the balance. What she holds inside her is more than just a life, she's a key, and you're now a part of that key." Jake shook his head in disbelief. "A key to what? What the hell is going on?" The man stepped back, folding his arms. "She is the last of her kind. An ancient lineage, lost for centuries. And you, Jake, have been chosen to protect her, whether you realize it or not. Your past is connected to her, and hers to yours." Jake's heart raced. He had no idea what this man was talking about, but one thing was clear, his world had just become a lot more complicated. Just then, the girl stirred on the bed, her eyelids fluttering as if she were trying to wake up. Jake rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey," he said softly, brushing a strand of silvery hair from her face. "You're safe. It's okay." Her eyes slowly opened, and Jake could see the faint glow in them, an alien hue he had never seen before. She blinked a few times, as if adjusting to the new surroundings, before her gaze locked onto him. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "I did," Jake replied quietly, not entirely sure what else to say. She smiled faintly, her lips curving just enough to show her gratitude. But there was something in her eyes, something that hinted at a deeper understanding, as if she knew exactly what had just happened. "I don't know why you saved me," she said softly, "but you've just altered everything. You've changed the path, Jake." Her words hung in the air between them, a silent promise of something yet to come. Jake could feel the weight of her statement settle deep in his chest. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But she didn't answer. Instead, she closed her eyes again, drifting back into unconsciousness, leaving Jake with more questions than answers. As he sat there, watching her, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming, he wasn't ready for it. And yet, he knew deep down that he had no choice but to face it. He had already crossed the line. There was no turning back now. Jake sat beside the girl, his mind still racing after everything that had happened. The weight of her words, "You've changed the path," hung heavily in the air. What had he really done by saving her? What path had he altered, and how did his past fit into all of this? He glanced down at the girl, still unconscious but breathing steadily, her pale skin shimmering faintly under the artificial light. The room was quiet now, except for the soft hum of the machines around them. The man who had brought them here hadn't said much since the girl had woken up. He was standing by one of the consoles, his back turned, typing in something on a holographic screen. Jake stood up slowly and walked over to him. "What do you mean by changing the path?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man didn't turn around immediately. His fingers hovered over the screen, his movements deliberate, as if he were calculating something. Finally, he spoke. "By saving her, you've started something that can't be undone. You're tied to her now, whether you like it or not. And with that comes responsibility." Jake felt a knot tighten in his chest. Responsibility? What kind of responsibility could he possibly have? "I don't even know who she is," Jake said, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "How can I be responsible for something I don't understand?" The man turned slowly, his face still impassive. "You'll learn. But for now, you need to protect her. There are forces at play here, ones far beyond your understanding. And you've just entered the middle of it." Jake clenched his fists, the frustration bubbling inside him. "I didn't ask for any of this. I'm just trying to survive, and now I'm being dragged into whatever this is. I don't even know who I can trust." The man's gaze softened, but his voice remained calm. "Trust will come with time. But you must know that your actions have consequences, Jake. You've become part of something that started long before you were born." Jake turned away, his mind still reeling. He couldn't understand what the man was saying. How could his life, his past, be tied to someone he had just met? He didn't ask for this, didn't ask to be thrown into the middle of some galactic conflict. He only wanted to survive. But he was here, and there was no going back now. He looked back at the girl, still resting. She was important. He knew that much, even if he didn't understand why. The man seemed to read his thoughts, or maybe he just knew what Jake was going through. "She's not just a person, Jake. She's a key to a power that has been hidden away for centuries. And you are part of that now." Jake didn't know how to respond. "So, what now?" he asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. The man's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dark crossing his face. "Now, we wait for her to recover. And when she does, the real journey begins." Jake wasn't sure what that meant, but he knew he had no choice but to follow along. As he turned back to the girl, he realized that his life had already changed. He was no longer just a soldier, no longer just trying to survive. He was part of something bigger, something he couldn't yet comprehend. And no matter how hard he tried, he knew there was no turning back. Jake spent the next few days on edge. The quiet hum of the ship's life support system seemed almost too loud in the silence of the room where the girl lay. He kept his distance, watching her closely as she slowly regained consciousness. Each time she stirred, he couldn't help but wonder what she knew, what she wasn't saying. The man who had brought them here hadn't given Jake much more than cryptic instructions and a vague sense of urgency. "When she wakes, you will know," the man had told him. But Jake didn't feel ready. He wasn't sure he ever would be. The girl had started to show signs of waking up more often now, her eyes fluttering open for short bursts of time. Each time, Jake was there, ready, but unsure what to say. He had never been good with silence, especially in situations like this. The girl's skin shimmered faintly under the dim lights, her silvery hair falling across her face like a halo. She looked fragile, but there was something undeniably powerful about her presence. She wasn't just any alien. Jake could feel that. But why had he been chosen? What role was he supposed to play in this? The questions gnawed at him, leaving him restless. Finally, one evening, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, she opened her eyes fully. This time, her gaze was clear, and she looked at Jake with an intensity that caught him off guard. "You're here," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. Jake nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, I'm here." The silence stretched between them for a moment, neither of them knowing where to begin. "You saved me," she said, her voice tinged with gratitude but also something else, something heavier, as if she knew the consequences of his actions. Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't really have a choice." She raised an eyebrow slightly, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "Of course you did. You could have walked away, but you didn't." Jake's chest tightened. He didn't know how to explain it, but she was right. He had made a choice. And now, here they were. "What's your name?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nira," she said simply. The name was soft, melodic, and somehow ancient-sounding. "Nira," Jake repeated, tasting the name on his tongue. "Why are you so important?" It was a blunt question, but it was the one that had been haunting him. Nira's eyes softened, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Her gaze flickered to the ceiling, as if gathering her thoughts. "I am the last of my kind," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of sorrow, a heaviness that Jake could feel in the pit of his stomach. "My people were once the guardians of an ancient power. But we were betrayed, hunted, and now I am the last one." Jake's mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. She was the last of her kind? A guardian of an ancient power? What kind of power? He asked, his voice low, almost afraid of the answer. Nira met his gaze again, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "A power that can change the course of everything," she said softly. "And you, Jake, are now tied to it. You saved me, and in doing so, you've taken on a responsibility greater than you can imagine." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Nira nodded slowly, as if she understood. "None of us asked for it. But now that you've stepped into this, there's no turning back." The words echoed in Jake's mind. There's no turning back. He had known, deep down, that his life had changed the moment he found her, but hearing it from her, hearing the finality in her voice, made it real. He was part of something bigger now. Something he couldn't escape. "What happens now?" Jake asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Nira's eyes softened, and she smiled faintly. "Now, we begin," she said quietly, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "We begin the journey to find the truth and stop those who would use this power for their own ends." Jake wasn't sure what he was ready for, but in that moment, he knew one thing for certain, there was no going back. The journey had already started, and his life would never be the same. Jake sat silently as Nira's words echoed in his mind. "We begin the journey to find the truth and stop those who would use this power for their own ends." He didn't know exactly what he had gotten himself into, but he felt a growing sense of responsibility, an unfamiliar weight on his shoulders. He looked at Nira, still weak but more awake now, her eyes focused, her body slowly healing. It was clear she was more than just the last of her kind, she was a key, a protector, and something that could change everything. The realization settled over him, and he understood that nothing about his life would ever be ordinary again. The man who had brought them to this hidden place had told him they needed to prepare. Prepare for what, exactly? Jake wasn't sure. He wasn't a strategist, not like the leaders he'd seen in the military, but he knew how to follow orders. And right now, his only order was to keep Nira safe. "How do we start?" Jake asked, his voice steady, though his mind raced. Nira looked at him, her gaze intense and unwavering. "First, we need to find the others," she said softly. Jake raised an eyebrow, confused. "Others? You mean people like you?" Nira nodded slightly, her expression serious. "There are those who seek to control what I carry within me. They are powerful, dangerous, and they will stop at nothing to get it. We need to find the others who can help protect this power, those who can stop them before it's too late." Jake didn't know who these others were, but the urgency in her voice told him it wasn't something they could take lightly. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and the man who had brought them here entered the room. He looked at Jake and Nira, his expression unreadable. "It's time," he said, his voice calm but firm. Jake stood up, his instincts on alert. "Time for what?" The man's eye shifted to Nira. "Time to move. We can't stay here much longer. The longer we wait, the more danger you're in." Nira nodded, though her face showed no fear. "I'm ready," she said simply, her voice calm, as if she had already accepted the risks. Jake glanced between the two of them, his mind trying to catch up. He wasn't sure what the next steps would bring, but he knew one thing: he wasn't walking away. He'd made a choice when he saved her, and now he was bound to it. "Where do we go?" Jake asked, his voice low but determined. The man gave him a nod, as if he'd been waiting for the question. "We head to the city. There's someone there who can help you. But we'll need to move fast." Without waiting for another word, the man turned and led the way. Jake followed closely, Nira at his side, her presence steadying him in a way he didn't fully understand. As they walked, the weight of the journey ahead settled on Jake. They were leaving behind the relative safety of the hidden facility, stepping out into a world full of unknowns, where danger and allies were equally uncertain. But despite the uncertainty, Jake knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, he wasn't facing it alone. Nira was with him. And somehow, he was beginning to realize that she wasn't the only one whose fate had been altered that day. His own path had changed, too. And now, they were both part of something that neither of them could undo. Jake followed the man through the winding corridors, the heavy silence hanging between them. Nira walked beside him, her steps quiet but steady. The air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jake felt it too: something in the air had changed since the moment he had saved her. The path ahead was unclear, and the weight of their journey pressed down on him more heavily with each step. He didn't know where they were headed, only that Nira had said they needed to reach the city, and that was enough for now. The man led them through the underground tunnels to an old transport vehicle. It was nothing fancy, but it looked sturdy enough. The man didn't waste time, immediately sliding into the driver's seat and starting the engine. Nira sat quietly beside Jake, her expression unreadable, lost in her own thoughts. Jake could feel the uncertainty swirling in his chest, but he couldn't show it. He had to stay focused, for her. For the mission. The vehicle hummed to life, and they began their journey through the forgotten paths beneath the city. Outside, the world was silent, the city streets almost deserted at this time of night. Jake glanced at Nira, who was staring out of the small window, her face a mixture of calm and concentration. She was deep in thought, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. After a few minutes, the man spoke, his voice low and serious. "The city is a dangerous place right now. There are eyes everywhere, and you need to be careful." Jake turned his attention to him. "What do you mean?" The man's gaze met his through the rearview mirror. "There are groups who want what she carries. And they won't stop until they get it." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What exactly does she carry?" The man's eyes flickered briefly to Nira, then back to the road. "It's not just a physical thing. It's something much more dangerous. Something they're willing to do anything to control." Nira's voice broke through the silence, quiet but steady. "It's a power. An ancient power." Jake looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "What kind of power?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nira met his gaze, her eyes filled with a strange mix of sorrow and resolve. "The kind that can change everything. The kind that can reshape worlds." Jake swallowed hard. He didn't know what to think anymore. This had started out as a simple rescue mission, but now it felt like he was caught in something far bigger than he could comprehend. They drove in silence for a while longer, the city lights flickering in the distance as they drew closer. The man took a turn down a narrow alley, the shadows growing longer as the streets became less familiar. They were nearing the heart of the city now, and Jake could feel the air change. Something was coming. He didn't know what, but he could sense it. The man slowed the vehicle, his eyes scanning the street ahead. Stay close, he said, his voice a low murmur. We're almost there. Jake nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew he had to protect Neera. She was the key to something, he could feel it. And he had no idea what that something was, but he knew it was dangerous. As they approached a large building, the man stopped the vehicle, turning to face Jake and Neera. We need to go inside. It's the only safe place for now. Jake looked at Neera, who nodded slightly, her face unreadable. He trusted her, but the uncertainty still gnawed at him. Lead the way, Jake said. The man nodded, opening the door. The air outside was cold, the streets eerily quiet. As they stepped out of the vehicle, Jake kept his guard up, his senses alert. They walked quickly toward the entrance, the man in front, Neera beside Jake, and Jake bringing up the rear. The building loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and glass, its shadow stretching across the street. Whatever was waiting inside, Jake was ready. Ready for whatever was coming next.